Today, we're undertaking a deep dive into, well, a colossal world, the world of Brandon Sanderson. He's an author whose career is uh, less of a typical literary path and more of a complete market restructuring.
And the scale is it's hard to wrap your head around. We're talking about an author who, in a normal year, consistently earns around $10 million.
Which already makes him the highest-selling writer of epic fantasy in the world. I mean, that's the baseline.
Okay, so let's start there. 10 million a year is already staggering for any writer, but our sources are pointing to the sudden explosive jump last year.
That's right. His earnings reportedly shot up to $55 million.
55.
55. And that is an almost unheard of economic leap for a single creative, let alone, a writer who's often described by critics as producing what was a quote, young, adultish, never-ending, speed-written fantasy books.
And that contrast right there, that's the core of our mission today.
Exactly. We need to understand how this happened, why it happened now, and what this really intense debate over the quality of his writing tells us about, well, the entire state of genre fiction.
And it seems like from the sources, the key to unlocking all this is a tension between two sort of competing ideas of value.
Right. On one side, you've got the traditional literary measure, let's call it aesthetics, beautiful prose, nuance, deep character work.
And on the other side...
On the other, you have this rising metric of modern consumerism. Let's call that utility.
Utility. So
yeah.
Systematic design, making sure the plot works like a clock.
Yes, mechanical plot coherence, and maybe most importantly, reliability of output, just knowing the next one is coming.
And the defining moment, the central piece of evidence for utility winning this fight, it seems to be one single event.
Oh, absolutely. The Secret Project's Kickstarter campaign. Yeah, this wasn't just a fundraiser. It was a financial shockwave. It completely changed the game for the author-audience relationship.
That's the $42 million benchmark we've heard about. And the numbers, they just defy all traditional publishing logic.
They do. It broke the all-time funding record for any publishing project on Kickstarter, ever. It raised over $20 million in the first 3 days.
The first 72 hours.
And just kept going. It ended up near $42 million.
And what that figure represents? It's so much more than just money, isn't it? It's proof that a creator can have this decentralized economic power.
It is. It showed that an author, or really an author's company, could just completely bypass all the traditional gatekeepers. The editors, the publishers, the financial backers, all of them.
The money wasn't an advance from a publisher. It was a direct investment from fans.
An investment of trust in a brand.
So if the economic engine is utility, volume, and reliability, then the big debate, the big fight, has to be about what gets sacrificed to achieve that, and that's aesthetics.
That's the tension, and that's what's going to guide our deep dive today.
And just to ground this conversation, we should probably introduce a key piece of jargon right at the top.
Good idea. The Cosmere.
The Cosmere.
This is the fictional universe that links a lot of Sanderson's major works. Mistborn, the Stormlight Archive, a bunch of others. And it's not just a setting, it's a meticulously designed engine for his narratives. It is the ultimate expression of utility.
Okay, let's start with that central thesis then. The idea that utility has basically triumphed over aesthetics as the main way we measure success in commercial fantasy now. What does that actually look like in practice?
It looks like a clockwork universe.
Right.
Seriously. When we talk about utility, we're talking about systematic design, coherence, and predictability. The value for the reader doesn't come from a perfect turn of phrase.
It comes from certainty.
Yes.
Yeah.
From the mechanical certainty that the magic systems will work, the rules will be consistent, and the plot gears will mesh perfectly every single time.
And I can see the appeal of that, especially when you compare it to the romanticized image of the tortured genius that the literary world loves to celebrate.
Right.
Because that model, that genius model, it often means years and years of delays. Sometimes books never even get finished.
Precisely. You have these famous examples of authors spending a decade just refining one manuscript. Sanderson is the polar opposite of that. He has a disciplined, process-oriented, almost industrial approach.
So he delivers.
He delivers major high-quality books reliably on an annual or maybe biannual basis. That consistency, that is the product.
And the sources show that the modern fantasy reader really, really values this. It's almost like a streaming show. You expect the next episode to drop on schedule.
That's a great analogy. A guarantee of delivery and completion. is a primary form of value now.
Right.
Readers aren't just buying one book. They're investing in a whole narrative experience that they trust will actually be completed.
I've seen quotes from readers online saying things like, they appreciate getting to read more than one book in a series before they die.
Exactly. It's that blunt. And to understand how he guarantees that mechanical coherence, that utility, we have to look at his core design principle.
Sanderson's laws of magic.
Sanderson's laws of magic. These aren't just, some loose guidelines. They are core tenets of his philosophy that make sure the magic always serves the story, not the other way around.
Okay, let's break those down, because this is where the idea of utility becomes really tangible.
So there are three main laws. The first law is the most important. It's an author's ability to solve problems with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic.
So no surprises.
No deus ex machina, where some random unknown power suddenly shows up to save the day. The rules have to be laid out clearly from the start.
So if a character pulls off some incredible feat,
The reader has to have understood that ability was possible from, chapter 1. It has to feel earned.
can you give us an example?
Sure. In Mistborn, the magic system is allomancy. You ingest and burn metals for specific powers. It's all very systematic, it's known, it's predictable. So when a character does something brilliant with it, it feels earned because the reader gets the input, the metal, and the output, the power. The whole system is like a puzzle the reader can solve with the characters.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's the second law?
The second law is limitations are more interesting than powers.
Yeah.
A magic system that's all-powerful with no drawbacks is just boring.
Right, there's no tension.
Exactly. The constraints, the costs, the weaknesses, that's what creates the drama. That's what forces characters to be clever. In the Cosmere, magic almost always comes with a huge physical cost, or it needs rare materials to work, like those weird spheres in the Stormlight Archive.
So if the magic is the solution, the limitation is the problem that makes the solution feel good.
You've got it. And the third law, it's the most flexible. It's before you innovate, systematize.
Meaning, build a solid foundation first.
Exactly. Make sure the existing structure is ironclad before you add any new fancy aesthetic bells and whistles. Basically, these laws turn the creative process from this intuitive, artistic thing into a rigorous, almost engineering-like process.
And that guarantees utility.
Every time.
Okay, so this level of high-volume, consistent output, it must require a huge business operation behind it. Which brings us to the Dragonsteel ecosystem.
Right. This is not just an author in a room writing. This is a company.
A vertically integrated content firm, I think is the term used.
That's a good way to put it. Dragonsteel is a sophisticated, vertically integrated firm. A good analogy is traditional publishing is like hiring a general contractor. They manage all the subcontractors.
Okay.
Dragonsteel is the architecture firm, the supply chain, the construction crew, and the property manager, all in one. They manage everything, the publishing, the logistics, the IP, even community events like the Dragonsteel Convention.
So they own the entire chain, from the idea in his head all the way to the physical book in your hands.
Precisely. And that's what allows for this scale.
Mm-hmm.
The sources mentioned the staff has specialists, artists, fulfillment managers, project coordinators. His family is involved. It's a full-on IP management firm that can handle complex international logistics without ever needing a big traditional publisher.
And this power was put on full display with that $42 million Kickstarter. It was an act of, what's the word? Disintermediation.
Disintermediation. It just means cutting out the middleman.
The publisher, the distributor, the retailer.
All of them. Think about what a traditional publisher does. They take on the financial risk, they give you the advance, and in return, they take the biggest cut of the profits.
But with Kickstarter and Dragonsteel, he just flipped that entire model on its head.
Completely. He didn't need an advance. He raised the capital, $42 million of it, directly from his audience before the books were even finished.
Which means he keeps all the profit and all the creative control.
Essentially, yeah. The fan base acted like his venture capital firm. They invested directly in his ability to deliver a future product, sight unseen.
There was a comparison in the sources that I found stunning. It said Dragonsteel's revenue from this single campaign actually exceeded the revenue of the entire Wired publication network in the same period.
Yeah, and that comparison is so key. It's not random. It highlights the power disparity between these new decentralized creators and the old media gatekeepers.
An author in Utah out-earned a major media publication.
Right, a publication that, ironically, often relies on those old systems for its own relevance. The lesson here is pretty stark. If you're a high IP creator who can guarantee utility,
Hmm.
you just don't need the old structures anymore.
You don't need their validation, and you certainly don't need their money.
Your brand's track record is the only currency that matters. This author as CEO model, it gives him this incredible financial resilience and control. It makes him immune to the kinds of pressures that shape so many decisions in traditional publishing.
We've established the business as this ruthlessly efficient machine, but does that systematic efficiency, does it carry over into his writing style? And is that where the critics really start to launch their attacks?
That's exactly it. Because if the books are making $55 million, the question becomes, why is the core critique so intensely focused on the quality of the writing itself? The prose. The critics argue that the same systematic approach that guarantees utility, it necessarily has to sacrifice aesthetics. And this is where the debate becomes a real flashpoint.
So what's the common criticism?
It's that his writing is average, simple, easy to read, or more harshly, composed by an algorithm. One critique I saw actually compared it to teenage fan fiction.
Wow. And the criticism gets really specific, doesn't it? The sources point to this habit of using repetitive, almost formulaic physical reactions for his characters.
Yeah, the infamous Sandersonisms.
Right.
Critics have literally cataloged how often characters have to sigh, frown, raise an eyebrow, cock a head, shrug, or snort.
And it's not just that it happens, it's that it happens constantly.
Right. It's seen as symptomatic of a writer who is prioritizing immediate clarity over, imaginative or nuanced description.
It's a shortcut. It's the difference between describing a complex internal emotion and just giving the character a physical tick the reader can process quickly and move on from.
Exactly. The prose is designed to be completely unobtrusive. The job of the sentence is to move the plot forward, not to make you stop and admire the sentence itself.
And this is almost self-referential, right? I read the characters in his book sometimes literally say things like, I have trouble with metaphors.
Yeah, that's a real line. This deliberate avoidance of figurative, poetic language. It's seen by critics as proof that the simplicity is a feature, not a bug. It's simple by design.
Which leads right into the critique that his style is video gamey.
Right, because you feel like you're reading the tutorial for a video game. The magic systems are explained in such detail. It's all about rules, inputs, outputs, the mechanisms.
So if the prose is functional and mechanistic, the critics then argue that the characters can sometimes suffer for it, that they lack a certain psychological depth.
And that brings us to a really major line of criticism, often called the Mormon lens critique. It addresses the profound relationship between his faith and his creative work.
Sanderson is very open about his faith. The sources describe him as very Mormon. And critics argue this worldview creates characters and relationships that are strangely asexual or extremely Puritan.
Yeah, the critique is that his characters sometimes feel like caricatures without genitals, meaning that the very human element of sexuality, desire, or complex romantic tension, it's often just absent, really severely toned down.
And for a secular audience, that can feel like it limits their depth.
The sources point to a very specific example from his breakthrough book, Mistborn, to really highlight this.
Romance between Vin and Eland.
Which is described as laughably childlike. And they cite this one moment where the mere idea of Eland seeing Vin's boob means they have to get married immediately.
Right. And this very puritanical view of intimacy is then placed in this really stark contrast to the graphic violence in his books.
Yes. The explicit portrayal of brutal torture, body horror, and death happens all the time. Critics point out this huge disparity. Extreme violence is fine to describe in detail, but any hint of natural human sexuality is just avoided.
And beyond that, the moral conflicts can feel a little black and white, lacking nuance.
Right, suggesting that the drive for structural coherence, for clear rules, it sort of overrides the actual messiness of human morality.
But these are aesthetic arguments, and they seem to miss the entire point of his audience and his business model. The fans clearly don't care.
They don't. They defend the writing. They point to its accessibility and its functionality.
The defense of accessible writing. The idea that the prose is unobtrusive and serviceable.
And crucially, that it doesn't require constant linguistic decoding. This makes it incredibly accessible to a massive global audience, people who might be reading in English as a second language, or who just want a fast-paced read.
I saw a great quote from a fan. Beautiful language is only beautiful if it serves to better convey an idea.
And that's the whole counter-argument in a nutshell. Sanderson's style, they say, ensures the prose never gets in the way of the story or the incredibly complex worlds he's building. The language is a clean window you look through to see the action.
So this really places him in a tradition with other huge commercial storytellers, like Stephen King or Robert Jordan.
Absolutely. Authors whose popularity has always relied on relentless storytelling and consistency, not on what critics might dismiss as purple prose.
So is the debate over prose really about quality? Or is it maybe just about snobbery?
It's a fair question. Literary snobbery often defines quality based on exclusivity density, ambiguity, the need for deep analysis. Sanderson's work, because it's so systematically accessible, rejects that. It democratizes the fantasy experience.
Story comes first?
The functional words follow, and the $55 million prove that choice is more than valid for the current market.
So this tension between his massive commercial success and these sort of lingering aesthetic and moral criticisms, it all just erupted with the Wired profile.
Oh, yeah. The one infamously titled Brandon Sanderson is Your God.
I mean, that title alone tells you the goal was provocation, not an actual portrait of the man.
Absolutely. The piece, by a journalist named Jason Kia, was just widely seen as blatant rage bait, a hap job that was strategically designed to offend the fan base and drive clicks.
And the backstory of the article is almost more interesting than the piece itself. Kia supposedly spent 5 months on it, and then basically confessed that he failed because the subject was, and I'm quoting here, depressingly, story-killingly lame.
He admitted he was looking for the classic media angle, the controversy, the hidden trauma, the skeletons in the closet.
And what did he find?
A normal guy who enjoys his job, loves his family, and is just a little obsessive about his stories. The lack of that tortured genius narrative was, for him, a crisis. He had no story.
So he pivoted, and the article just veers into what critics called personal derision and cultural profiling. The attack shifted from the work to the periphery, his staff, his family, his fans.
The attacks on his family and staff they were universally condemned. Critics pointed to how he described Sanderson's wife, Emily, as faceless and invisible, and his employees as nameless.
It just felt so gratuitous, especially given the access they gave him. It read like a violation of trust because the journalist was frustrated.
And then he went after the fans. The fan community was subjected to this really blatant snobbery. He used terms that feel like they're from the 1980s, like man boys and teenage girls.
The implication was that the fandom was just made up of silly nerds who should be ashamed for liking something that a traditional critic deems unworthy.
And you could feel this superiority complex in his critiques of the place, of the culture. He criticized Utah Chinese and Utah Japanese food.
As if a successful person from Salt Lake City couldn't possibly have any sophistication because he's not from New York or London.
And then there was that incredibly petty detail.
Yeah.
Mocking Sanderson's son for putting salt on his yakisoba. And the writer says, I could cry again.
Critics jumped all over that. An uncalled-for jab at a child's eating habits, which just shows he couldn't find anything interesting to say about a successful, well-adjusted person.
But the thing that really drew the most fire was his use of Sanderson's faith. He made the Mormon angle central, using terms like weirdo Mormons, calling the architecture in Salt Lake City Gothic, and calling Mormonism itself the fantasy genre of religion.
So it was seen less as substantive reporting and more as just a cheap dig, an attempt to frame everything in this negative, othering light.
Right. And it points to this massive missed opportunity. A better journalist, as so many people pointed out, would have explored the really interesting questions there.
Like how Mormon theology, the belief in eternal progression and becoming a creator god, how that relates directly to the Cosmere, where characters literally ascend to godhood.
Exactly. There's a real story there. But instead, it was all just reduced to a tool for mockery.
So the Wired profile, in the end, it really becomes a symbol of institutional failure, doesn't it? It's a subconscious response from old media to its own diminishing relevance.
I think so. The bitter, dismissive tone feels like a defense mechanism. When you can't successfully critique the product because the sales data completely undermines you, you pivot. You criticize the creator's character, their culture, their community. It was a failure of journalism to engage with the reality of creator-driven economics.
And one of the most important parts of this whole saga was Brandon Sanderson's response.
Oh, it was immediate, it was public, and he did it on Reddit, which is the perfect decentralized forum. And it was just, he was widely praised for being so measured and gracious.
He didn't fire back at all. He explicitly asked his huge community to show the journalist, Jason Key, respect. He told them to leave him alone.
And he argued that the writer just seemed like a sincere guy who floundered in trying to figure out what he could say to make deadline.
Which was a total strategic masterstroke. It reinforced his entire brand of transparency and, ethical leadership.
By treating the journalist as a struggling colleague instead of an enemy, he instantly took control of the whole narrative.
But hidden inside all that grace was a very subtle and very sharp critique of the journalist's actual craft.
Oh, it was a polite but deadly jab. He used that specific line. Good writing is making boring people interesting.
Implying that Kihei failed at the most basic task of writing a profile because he couldn't find a compelling angle on a transparent and successful person.
Exactly. And then he followed it up by arguing that people are inherently interesting. Wonderful, fascinating, brilliant balls of walking contradiction, passion, and beauty. He invoked Tolkien's idea about the spiritual need to create being innately human.
He even brought up a Terry Pratchett character, right? Stanley Howler from Going Postal.
Yeah, a character who finds profound wonder in just collecting tax. Sanderson's point was that a truly great writer can make a person obsessed with tax interesting.
So by referencing these literary giants, he basically just highlighted the journalist's failure to find anything interesting in a person who is merely well-adjusted and successful. He used literary analysis to critique the journalist's own work.
It was brilliant.
Okay, but we have to address the major ethical discussion that the Wired article completely whiffed on, the one it could have tackled substantively.
The consumer dilemma.
The tithing.
Right. Sanderson is completely transparent about the fact that he tithes 10% of his immense income, including, we have to assume, a big chunk of that $55 million windfall to the LDS Church.
An institution that holds, historically conservative political stances, especially on issues like LGBTQ plus rights.
And that is the core dilemma for a fan who might disagree sharply with the church's policies. Supporting Sanderson financially means you are, indirectly, contributing to an organization you might be fundamentally opposed to.
And what's Sanderson's response to this?
Well, it's twofold. First, he's very upfront about his own views changing over time, and his desire to be an agent of positive change from within the church. He believes in working inside the system. Second, his supporters argue that the LDS Church is already a financial juggernaut. We're talking an institution worth hundreds of billions. His contribution, while huge for him, is a drop in the bucket for them.
So a boycott wouldn't logically hurt the church. It would only punish the individual creator and maybe jeopardize the art the fans love.
That's the argument. It's a classic ethical tightrope for consumers. And by engaging with it transparently, Sanderson again reinforces his personal brand and highlights the critic's failure to engage in a meaningful way.
He maintained his integrity, while the journalist arguably lost his.
Exactly.
So to synthesize this entire deep dive, what's the big takeaway? It seems like Brandon Sanderson's whole phenomenon confirms this profound structural shift in how we define value in fiction.
I think that's exactly right. His monumental economic power, his market relevance, it doesn't come from traditional literary aesthetics. It doesn't come from the perfect sentence.
It comes from his ability to deliver these structurally sound, systematically complex, and above all, consistently delivered stories.
The market voted with its $42 million. Value in this new landscape is defined by utility and reliability, and that's valued, monetarily, much higher than subjective prose.
It's a total validation of the writer as IP architect and CEO over the writer as tortured artist.
And the Dragonsteel model, this vertical integration and direct-to-consumer disruption, it's probably the future for high IP authors. It gives them economic autonomy and poses a real existential challenge to the traditional publishing gatekeepers.
And the Wired article's failure, it's a cautionary tale for critics.
It is. It shows that traditional journalism, the kind that tries to manufacture conflict or relies on outdated cultural snobbery, it just can't keep up. It's becoming structurally irrelevant to the financial success of these creators.
Which brings us to one final provocative thought for you to consider.
This triumph of the systematic world is, I think, the most fascinating philosophical part of this whole story.
Sanderson once made this really striking statement. He said, "As I build books, God builds people," which suggests this deep link between his very systematic creative drive and his spirituality.
And if you look closely at the Cosmere, his universe, it's built on these highly systematic, interlocking rules. Every magic system is logical, predictable, governed by firm, almost scientific laws.
So what does this massive, widespread demand for fictional structure and reliable predictability reveal about us, about our underlying human need for order in what feels like a very chaotic world?
It says the triumph of the highly systematic fantasy world. A world where the rules are known, they're followed, and hard work is always rewarded. Does that signal a preference in the modern reader for a constructed, predictable reality over the kind of ambiguity, moral grayness, and chaos that we used to value in older literary fiction? That's the ultimate question about the appeal of the architect of utility in the 21st century.